Hi folks, Kevin here. Well, it's May 23rd, 2018, and today I'm on the east side of the workshop, the future educational center and all. And this is basically the central garden area. We have one on the west side of this building, and we have one further to the east over there as well. The day before yesterday, I got the tarps off. I think I posted a video about that. And I was only able to go just so far. Today so far, and there'll be some GoPro footage showing some time lapse, I was able to remove the rest of the weed mats. I've got them setting over to the side, warming up in the sun because we've had rain all day yesterday, some overnight, really foggy this morning, really moist conditions. And so I removed all of the weed mats and pulled up the stakes that hold them down, and I want to show you something. So I've mentioned before what I think is a really important thing. If you use weed mats, to make sure that you purchase and you're using staples or garden stakes to hold the weed mats down. Now you can use stone bags, you can use rocks, you can use sandbags, you can use boards, you can go ahead and take soil and move it up over the top. For me, the thing that I think that works the best is our good galvanized garden stakes. These are ones that I pulled up. We've had some of these in practice now for 2 years, trying to get rid of all of the ones that are like these ones here. And I'm not sure how well this is showing up. See if I can make sure it focuses on this. But it's just clumps of rust. And when you try to extract these, garden staples from the weed mat, it tends to shred the weed mat. Now we use the DeWitt weed mat, which I've talked about in previous videos. It works extremely well, can last a long time. But every time you're penetrating the weed mats themselves, with this it's almost invisible sites. But when you pull these up through, you start getting some fraying, and that the material can get all over the place. So I really do recommend using some of these galvanized garden stakes. Let me set these down. And it's hard to tell once you've had the garden stakes which ones are actually galvanized and which ones aren't. So I'm trying to get rid of all the ones that aren't galvanized on our property. Now they do make aluminum ones as well. We've got some really bony ground around here. The soil that you see in these beds ended up being great, so we can use it easily there. It's tougher to push them through wood chips as well, and we use wood chips in the walkways and the paths. And so enough said about that. And there will be a link down below for Amazon affiliate links, which doesn't cost you any more if you decide to get either the weed mat or any of the other things that we talk about. It's just a way of supporting us YouTube creators by clicking on their link and making your purchases at that time. It just helps us out as well. But it doesn't cost you anything. So I got the weed mats off. I pulled the drip tapes over to the side so they're out of the way. I do want to add some more compost to the area, and I want to weed this first. Now we just had rain, lots of fog and dew. Now the sun finally came out, so I really want the sun to bake to really have some time to have an effect where the top of the soil actually dries out. Because when it's wet soil or early morning dew hours and you're using your stirrup hoe or whatever cultivating tool that you're using, there's less of a chance that those weeds are going to be eliminated if there's moisture in the top surface of the soil, because you're disrupting the roots, and those tenacious weeds, sometimes they can just re-root themselves as well. So it's almost a waste of your time and energy to weed when the garden's still wet. So even though you're thinking, geez, I can't do other things, let me get out there and do some cultivating with the stirrup hoe or other hand cultivator that you may use. So I'm purposely not doing weeding in that respect. Now some of the perennial weeds, you'll see in some of the GoPro footage, I'm using a tree shovel. Let me just grab that real quick. So this shovel ends up being with a Razorback one. Who makes this? It's a fiberglass handle one. I've had this for several years. It's not one that I really recommend. It's a little too light duty for the heavy ground we got around here, but in the garden beds, it works fantastic. You sink it right in alongside of those deep tap-rooted perennial plants, or in my case, I actually brought up all of the dandelions that I could get because we're harvesting the dandelion roots at this time as well. So these shovels actually work really good if you're building these permanent raised beds, if you've got to get those tap roots out. By using a stirrup hoe on some of these perennial weeds that actually have a deep root down in there, well, sometimes they'll just come right back up and be persistent. So I get the shovel out first. The other thing I do is, like the clover and all, I'll go ahead, if there's a well-established bunch of clover, a clover plant, I'll go ahead and dig that up and put it in different spots on the property, reuse that plant, and get as much out of it as possible. A lot of the other plants are herbaceous plants that we do harvest at different times of the year and all, and there's a lot of plantain here now. But since it's been under mats, it's been a trampled on area, unfortunately, I'm just not going to do that. So as soon as it dries up a bit more, I'm going to go ahead and pull out those materials. There's still some of the corn stalk pieces over here as well. I'll probably lay down a couple of 2x12s, some of my older 2x12s, lumber for the tractor tires to go on, because I may drive up over some of these beds in order to make it easier for me to put some compost on some of these beds as well. Now, I created these beds, I think it was 2 years ago, and I'll try to put a link in the upper right hand corner to the video showing when I was creating these. So I made these beds deeper than what they are. Over here on this side, you may be able to see that there's a trough. The path is really deeper than over on this side of the garden. The reason is that the decomposition of the wood chips and other materials that were in these first couple of pathways in between the compost beds broke down much quicker. So what was in these first couple of beds? Certainly there were leaves, and I'm always using the comfrey plants, which go right along the border here, chopping those off and either placing those as a mulch right around the plants on the beds themselves, or throwing it right into the walkway. But when I constructed these first two paths, I still had some bales of hay that was not good. I think it was being used in the chicken coop and all. So I would take the pads of hay along with leaves, lay them down, and then put the wood chips on top of it. This area here also remained covered for a longer period of time because it was the winds were deflected by the building being right here, and therefore those high winds that we had this winter and spring uncovered the tarps over in this area, but did not affect the ones closer to the building. So these ones got solarized because there was clear plastic on it as well after I took the tarp off, and it was actually, I'm sorry, the solarized plastic was laid before I put the tarps on it. And so being under cover, it allowed a lot more microbial activity to go on in these paths. So I'm just going to go over and see what the material looks like in this pathway. The worms are slipping back in here so quick. Hopefully you'll be able to see. So it's all layered. You can see some leafy type material in here. Hopefully this is showing up. But the material is turning into beautiful, rich, black soil, breaking down nicely. Still very wet, but looking good. I'm going to go over to, let's see, can I turn this over here? Okay, it's still really wet here because there's the comfrey here, all these materials, and probably some water got extra water came off the eave of the roof, the overhang. And so we'll look at this material. Now again, the gravel's pretty shallow right in here. Really nice. You could see little bits of wood chip material in there. You can see some worms in there. Beautiful, although it's very wet right now. Oops, another worm there. So I can actually squeeze a little bit of water out of this, so it's a little bit too darn wet. Well, there's more worms in there. So that's pretty nice. Now we'll go over and take a look at. So that's mostly amended by the, cover these worms up, amended by the comfrey leaves over in here, because a lot of the time I don't get a chance to pick them up, and you can actually see along the path that there's comfrey leaves. Let me see if I can loosen this up. Comfrey leaves all along that margin there, going along the building. All right, let's see if I can move over here now. I would say one of the things I notice as I'm walking on this, you probably can't appreciate it, but it's a little spongy. You know, it has give to it in the material, in the walkway, where the beds feel very compacted. So that indicates to me that there's moisture in there, as well as there's a larger particulate size. But I'll break this down. Lots and lots of worms. And then you can see some of the layers of the wood chips. They're really getting broken down quite a bit, but not completely. You see, you can actually see some of the worms there as they're slipping back. I'm not sure if this is. Hopefully this is showing up as I break the material. So you can still see a lot of carbonaceous material, earthworms, red wigglers, all in this area, but it has a bit further to go. So the winds are picking up pretty much right now. Hopefully the audio is good with this windsock on this camera. And so I wanted to show you how the walkways that have been laid with the wood chips, I'll be making more videos about the wood chips that we're using and how I use them in different parts of the property for different types of slow soil building, some of it used for composting, some of it mixed in with logs, but I'm never actually mixing it with the compost itself. So when you see these garden beds, these are all compost piled up on places in rows in between the layers of the wood chips, which are the paths. So so about 2 years is where that's gotten to. Now this path, as well as the rest of them, now there's been more fresh wood chips added to this far end here last year, and to the very end along the walkway. So wherever the walkways are, I try to add wood chips at least once a year to try and raise the height. So the slope of the property comes down this way, and I mentioned in the last video on the with using the tarps that having those deep pathways in between the deep walkways between each one of the permanent raised beds allows the water accumulation when the beds are tarped. And this pathway that I have at this very end of it, the lowest point of the slope of the garden beds, I actually build this up, make sure that the pathways are sort of occluded by the wood chips, so that the pathway in between each of these beds, water will accumulate and it won't go over. It creates a dam effect at this end, and therefore increases the amount of water or ice or snow accumulation that sits on top of the tarps throughout the winter time. So I just wanted to go over that as well. So I'm going to pull out some of the larger plants now, and maybe I'll be able to do some of the stirrup hoe or some of the work to dislodge some of those those weeds, but it still seems a bit too wet at this point. I may go on to another project, but I do need to get these beds ready because Memorial weekend is coming up, and that's about the timing that we got to get plants in the ground that week, the week after, to get our earlier crops when we're not doing season extensions. So let's see how things go. Well, folks, I got quite a bit done. I've got a lot of the weeding done. I've got a little bit more to do, but I'm pretty happy with how much I got accomplished today. I got all the dandelion out that I wanted to get out. I found some bird's foot trefoil and some clover, got those transplanted. And I basically have two tractor bucket loads of weedy material that's going up to the compost pile. So I'm pretty happy with how much I got done. I've got to think about how I really want to approach applying the compost, and whether I want to put some more wood chips in between here, and whether I want to run a flame weeder over the whole system before I start adding compost. I'll think about that and ultimately decide. But I've got enough of this accomplished for now. I've got to do some chores and potentially start editing a video, and I think that's about it. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. If you think this was of value, please give it a thumbs up. And by all means, have a fantastic day. And don't forget, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and hit that bell if you want to be notified when I do post another video. Thanks, folks. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.